Burmese pythons have devastated the native wildlife of the Everglades. Deep in the swamps of Florida, cameras are now capturing an outcome that is confusing scientists. For decades, all we heard about was the invasion, the complete takeover of the territory by giant pythons. But recent footage shows something new. It reveals a hidden consequence no one predicted, and a desperate attempt the entire world once mocked. The pythons are still there, but they're no longer the only story. What has been found in the Everglades isn't just an apocalypse. It's a shocking and unexpected plot twist that changes everything we thought we knew about this ruined paradise. Florida's great mistake. Long before the chaos, the Everglades were a living, breathing miracle. Florida's great mistake. Long before the chaos, the Everglades were a living, breathing miracle. But before we begin, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Now let's get started. It wasn't just a swamp, it was a vast, slow-moving river of grass stretching over more than 1.5 million acres. An ancient and complex system, a wild subtropical region overflowing with life. It was so important that its annual economic value was estimated at over $31.5 billion. See, it wasn't just home to alligators and birds. It provided flood protection and drinking water for millions of people in South Florida. Life there existed in a perfect, delicate balance. Huge flocks of herons, spoonbills, egrets, and ibises filled the sky. So many they looked like clouds. Raccoons, opossums, and marsh rabbits darted through the sawgrass, while native bobcats and foxes roamed the tree islands known as hammocks. It was one of the last truly wild places in the country, and no one, not even the experts, imagined that everything could collapse so fast. This nightmare didn't begin with a bang. It began with a whisper, a storm. In August 1992, Hurricane Andrew, a monstrous Category 5 storm, tore apart South Florida. Winds screamed above 165 mph. It obliterated entire neighborhoods, and in the chaos, it destroyed a reptile breeding facility near Miami. When the winds finally died, an unknown number of Burmese pythons, a species native to Southeast Asia, had escaped into the wetlands. But here's the thing, the storm wasn't the only problem. At the same time, another, slower disaster was unfolding. During the 1980s and 1990s, the Burmese python became the new, trendy exotic pet. People bought hatchlings for $10, thinking they looked cool, but there was one problem. They don't stay small, they grow fast. A snake that fits in your hand becomes a 10-foot, 55-pound monster in just a few years. And that's not the limit. They can exceed 20 feet and weigh over 200 pounds. Big enough to take down an adult deer. Overwhelmed owners, stuck with a giant, dangerous predator, did the only thing they could think of. They drove to the edge of the Everglades and simply released them. They thought they were setting them free. In reality, they were lighting the fuse of an ecological time bomb. That's the official story everyone knows. But here's a darker idea. What if the story about irresponsible pet owners was just a convenient excuse? What if the hurricane didn't just destroy a facility, but the facility, a massive undocumented operation that dumped thousands of snakes into the swamp at once? Some researchers whispered that the speed of the invasion simply doesn't match the narrative of a few released pets. It's a mystery that has never been solved. For years, no one paid much attention. A few sightings here and there were just curiosities. But the pythons weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The Everglades were a perfect storm of opportunity. A paradise for pythons, heat, humidity, endless shallow water, and an enormous buffet of native animals. Animals with no defense whatsoever. They had never, in millions of years, faced a predator like this. The Burmese python is a machine of nature, masters of camouflage. They vanish into vegetation. They can hold their breath for over 30 minutes. And most impressive, they have heat-sensing pits along their jaws. They literally see heat in the dark. A raccoon has no chance. And then there's reproduction. Oh, the reproduction. A single female can lay up to 100 eggs. With no natural predators to control them, the population exploded. Today, experts estimate there are between 100,000 and 300,000 pythons crawling across South Florida, and the paradise once full of life is now silent. The numbers are so extreme they seem fake. A landmark 2012 study revealed the horrifying truth. In the hardest hit areas of the Everglades, raccoon populations fell by 99%. 87.3%. Opossums dropped 98.9%. Bobcats 87.5%. Think about that. Not 10%, not 50%, 99% gone. Erased. What people don't realize is what that means. Biologists and hunters who've worked in the Everglades for decades talk about the silence. They remember driving down back roads and having to stop constantly for raccoons, turtles, rabbits. Now they see nothing for miles, for days. The small mammals that supported the entire food chain were devoured. The invaders found paradise and consumed it whole. The balance that kept the Everglades alive for millennia wasn't just broken, it was shattered. And when authorities finally understood the scale of the disaster, they discovered they were fighting a ghost. The swamp was silent, but the pythons had not come alone. The impossible war. As the silence became deafening, the state of Florida had to act. But the first response looked like something straight out of a cheap reality show. In 2013, they created the Florida Python Challenge. Part media stunt, part desperate gamble. They invited the public, basically anyone brave enough, to hunt the giant snakes. There were cash prizes, including $10,000 for the most captures. It became an annual spectacle. In 2024, more than 800 people showed up. In 2024, more than 800 people arrived before the sun had even risen. Men, women, teenagers, war veterans, professional hunters, amateur explorers, curious onlookers with phones in hand, all gathered as if a marathon were about to begin. Except the prize, in this case, was something entirely different. Instead of medals, they were after giant snakes. Instead of a marked route, they had miles of swamp, leaf litter, cypress islands, and knee-deep mud. Instead of cheering crowds, they had mosquitoes, suffocating heat, and the heavy smell of mangrove. The annual python hunting tournament had begun. People came from all over the state, even from other countries. Some came to test their courage. Some came for the cash prize. Some came out of ecological patriotism, to remove the invader and save a dying forest. And some came treating it like a kind of modern game, a chance to face a real monster that for most people lived only in imagination. The atmosphere felt festive, but it would soon turn bitter. Armed, trained, and still at a massive disadvantage. Everyone was armed with simple, almost medieval tools because firearms are not allowed in the Everglades during these events. Capture hooks, reinforced bags, transport boxes, knives, protective vests, high-powered flashlights, and of course, enough courage to put their hands on a snake that, when cornered, can turn into a whirlwind of muscle and teeth capable of breaking arms, crushing ribs, and slicing flesh like a razor. Still, these people were attempting something that decades of public policy, millions of dollars, and armies of scientists could not achieve, significantly reducing the Burmese python population. By the end of that year, after all the effort, mobilization, and adrenaline, they captured 195 snakes. For the news outlets, this was gold. Amazing photos, giant snakes held by smiling pairs of hunters, impressive videos, animals pulled from burrows, short struggles, heavy breathing, social media posts going viral. It looked like an epic victory. It looked like, but it wasn't. 195 is a lot, and yet it's nothing. The math is brutal, emotionless, cheerless, hopeless. Let's take the most conservative estimate accepted by experts. 100,000 pythons. 195 removed is only 0.19% of the population. If the real population is closer to what many biologists believe, 300,000 to 500,000, then 195 snakes mean absolutely nothing statistically. And worse, each adult female can lay 50 to 100 eggs per clutch. A single missed female produces 3 times the number of pythons removed during the entire event. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon while the tide is rising. The math doesn't lie. The Everglades weren't recovering. They were dying. Slowly, silently, but dying. 2025, a new record. Still a defeat. The following year in 2025, another record. 294 snakes removed. More photos, more headlines, more shallow celebrations, but reality only grew crueler. Even in the best case scenario, 294 is less than 0.3% of the estimated population. In the worst and most likely scenario, it's not even 0.1%. The snake wasn't losing. The snake was growing. The war escalates. Professionals enter the field frustrated, embarrassed, and pressured by public opinion. Florida made a drastic decision. Hire professional hunters, trained people, paid by the hour, equipped, monitored, patrolling day and night. And these These weren't there for adventure or cool photos. They were there for real work. Hard, exhausting, relentless. Since 2017, these professionals have removed thousands of pythons. The number is scary, impressive, headline-worthy. 23,000 snakes removed. 23,000. It's a lot, it's huge. But still, probably less than 5% of the total population, because while one is removed, 20 are born unseen in the grass, camouflaged, silent, perfect, and no human technology has been able to break this cycle. The era of technologies that failed the state then changed strategy. If they couldn't find them in the darkness of the swamps, maybe they could find them from the air. Thermal drones equipped with infrared cameras, heat sensors, automated mapping. It sounded brilliant. It sounded like the future. But there was a problem. The Everglades are hot, very hot. The soil is hot, the water is hot, the air is hot. And pythons are cold-blooded. They match the temperature of their environment. To a thermal camera, they become just another warm rock among many. The drones failed. The robotic rabbits. An almost comical experiment, but an expensive one. Heated robotic decoys, artificial sounds of living rabbits, programmed movements to attract predators. It worked with foxes and coyotes in other regions. Here, zero effect. Pythons aren't chase predators, they're ambush predators. They wait, and noisy robots aren't part of their evolutionary vocabulary. Total failure, the Judas snake strategy. The most promising idea, the smartest method, and the strangest. A large male is captured. A transmitter is implanted. He is released during mating season. Driven by hormones, he will inevitably find a female ready to lay eggs, and researchers will find her. It worked, but it's slow, expensive, requires specialized teams, and removes only a few snakes at a time, while thousands are born during the same period. It was like winning isolated battles while losing the entire war. The most terrifying theory, experienced hunters began reporting something strange, very strange. They know where we are. They avoid human trails. They avoid noisy areas. Tagged males make perfect loops like they're trying to mislead us. They've learned. Was it coincidence, paranoia, human bias, or something deeper? The question quietly began circulating among the boldest researchers. Can a predator with no threats evolve accelerated behavioral intelligence? It's a disturbing thought. Predators that are never hunted, never chased, never in danger become bold. Boldness followed by repeated success becomes behavior. Repeated behavior becomes adaptation, and adaptation becomes something that looks very much like learning. Could pythons be getting smarter? No one wanted to admit it officially, but many already suspect it. The harsh reality, the pythons' one technology failed. Hunters were outmatched. Federal, state, and private forces all together failed. And after billions of dollars and decades of effort, some scientists finally had the courage to say it publicly. Eradication is impossible. You can't win anymore. You can't remove them all. All you can do is control. The pythons took the Everglades. They took the swamps. They took the entire food chain. Today, nothing we invent, robots, drones, satellites, armies of hunters, can remove them. But the darkest truth was still coming, because the real enemy wasn't what everyone could see. It wasn't a 20-foot muscle-bound, camouflaged snake. It was something invisible, microscopic, and infinitely more dangerous. Its name is Rhyliatiella orientalis. It's best known as the snake lungworm. Scientists discovered this threat by accident during necropsies of native Florida snakes. They were finding native species, garter snakes, pygmy rattlesnakes, water snakes, extremely thin, weak, gasping for air. When they opened them up, they found a true horror show. Their lungs and airways were clogged with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of tiny worms writhing inside. They quickly traced the origin. This lungworm originally comes from Asia, the homeland of the Burmese python. For thousands of years, pythons and this parasite evolved together. Pythons can carry the worm without suffering major damage. They're used to it, they have natural defenses. But Florida's native snakes? They have no defense at all. It's an entirely new alien enemy. And here's the twist about how this new plague spreads. Its life cycle is terrifyingly simple. An infected python defecates in the swamp. The feces contain the worm's eggs. Cockroaches and other insects feed on the material, and the eggs hatch inside them. Lizards and frogs eat those infected insects. Finally, a native Florida snake eats the infected frog or lizard. Once the larvae enter the snake's body, the journey begins. They don't stay in the stomach. They pierce through the stomach wall and migrate directly into the lungs. There they grow. They feed on blood and tissue, and they reproduce. They clog the snake's airways until it can no longer breathe. For many native snakes, this infection is a slow and brutal death. They become too weak to hunt. They end up starving while simultaneously suffocating. Researchers found snakes with severe pneumonia and open hemorrhagic lesions in their lungs. In the worst cases, they witnessed worms literally crawling out of the snake's mouths as they agonized. This is the real unexpected twist. The pythons were the first wave. They wiped out the mammals. The parasite is the second wave, and it came to wipe out the native reptiles. The biggest shock came when scientists discovered how far the worm had already spread. It's no longer just in the Everglades. At least 18 native Florida snake species have been found infected. The parasite now spans dozens of counties. Some reports say it has reached Jacksonville and is advancing toward the Panhandle. And here's the part that terrifies scientists. The pythons may have started all this, but the worm no longer needs them. It has already established itself in native hosts. It now spreads on its own, from native snake to native snake, meaning even if, by some miracle, every Burmese python were removed tomorrow, the lungworm would still be there. It's here, it's alive, and it's thriving. When native snakes, a crucial part of the food chain, begin to disappear, the balance collapses again. Rodents and other pests multiply. Larger predators that eat snakes, like hawks and eagles, lose their food source. And now come the darker theories. First, is this parasite mutating? It already jumped from an Asian host to dozens of North American hosts. What's stopping it from jumping again? Which leads to the most terrifying question of all. Could it jump to mammals or even humans? Researchers say it's highly unlikely, but here's the problem. They also said the worm couldn't jump from pythons to native garter snakes. And it did. What if a dog eats an infected frog? What if a hunter handles an infected snake? For now, they say we're safe, but in a world where this thing adapts by the minute, safe is a strong word. There is, however, a strange twist. Florida's cottonmouth, the water moccasin, a native viper, seems highly resistant to the parasite. No one knows why. Is it something in its genetics? In its diet? This mystery led to another theory. What if the water moccasin is the key? What if its blood holds the secret against the parasite? A cure. What began as a battle against a giant visible monster became a war against an invisible, microscopic enemy. There is no cure, no treatment, and no way to stop it. A monster no one could see was wiping out the few survivors. Florida was out of options. Then came a plan so absurd the entire world burst into laughter. The desperate gamble. With the python invasion completely out of control and a new invisible plague spreading like wildfire, Florida was beyond desperation. The state was a global joke. The ecosystem was in a coma, and that's when the authorities announced the plan. When the news broke, it sounded like a joke. It sounded like something ripped from a late-night comedy sketch or a classic Florida Man headline. Authorities announced they were releasing hundreds of new snakes into the wild to help fight the invasive python crisis. The world exploded. Social media went wild. Doesn't Florida already have too many snakes? Fight snakes with more snakes? What could possibly go wrong? Mockery was immediate. People compared it to the infamous cane toad disaster in Australia, released in the 1930s to control beetles. The toads ignored the beetles, multiplied into the billions, and became a toxic plague that still devastates Australian wildlife today. People also brought up the Hawaiian mongoose fiasco. In the 19th century, mongooses were introduced to control rats in sugarcane fields. But rats are nocturnal. Mongooses are diurnal. They almost never met. Result: mongooses attacked native ground nesting birds, causing ecological disaster. People shouted, "This is the same mistake." Humans playing God again. This is going to make everything 1,000 times worse. Newspapers printed headlines that sounded like a bad sci-fi movie. Anxious residents wondered if their pets and children were safe. To the average person, it sounded absurd. a plan doomed to fail before it even began. But here's the truth, this wasn't the idea of some Florida lunatic, and this wasn't just any snake. Behind the laughter and the headlines, scientists had been working quietly for decades on a desperate and brilliant plan. The snake being released was the eastern indigo snake, and it wasn't an invasive species. It was the rightful queen returning to reclaim her throne. The eastern indigo is known as the emperor of the forest, and for good reason. It is the longest native snake in all of North America, a powerful, non-venomous predator that can reach nearly 3 meters in length. Its scales have an incredible iridescent blue-black sheen that glimmers in sunlight with a coral orange tint under the chin. But it's not its beauty that makes it legendary, it's its diet. The indigo snake is what we call ophiophagus, meaning it eats other snakes. And more than that, it is completely immune to the venom of North America's pit vipers, rattlesnakes, water moccasins, copperheads. The indigo eats them all. It doesn't constrict, it simply pins the prey with powerful jaws and swallows it alive, utterly indifferent to the struggle. It is basically the supreme boss of the forest floor, but its kingdom collapsed. The fate of the indigo snake is tied to two things: longleaf pine forests and gopher tortoises. First, the forests. The snake thrived in the ancient longleaf pine ecosystem, a habitat that once covered nearly 90 million acres of the southeastern US. Today, because of logging, development, and the suppression of natural fires, almost 97% of that original forest is gone. Second, the tortoise. The eastern indigo does not dig its own burrows. It relies almost entirely on the deep tunnels excavated by the gopher tortoise. These burrows are like underground apartment complexes, offering protection from fire and cold. More than 350 other species depend on them. The gopher tortoise is what we call a keystone species. The entire ecosystem rests upon it. As longleaf forests were destroyed and tortoises were hunted or displaced, the indigo snake vanished. During the Great Depression, people dug up tortoises for food and killed any snake they found hiding inside. By 1978, the eastern indigo was listed as a threatened species. It had been completely wiped out from Alabama and northern Florida. So what looked like a ridiculous plan wasn't about adding a new snake. It was about restoring a native apex predator that humans had already eliminated. For decades, a coalition of conservation groups and state agencies had been breeding indigo snakes in captivity with extreme care. They were restoring patches of longleaf pine forest and protecting gopher tortoise populations. What seemed to the public like an impulsive, crazy idea was actually one of the slowest, most meticulous, most scientifically grounded restoration projects ever attempted. But that doesn't mean the wild theories are wrong. What if this becomes the mongoose scenario? What if we're releasing a new apex predator into a system that's already completely broken? What will the indigos eat after they finish the pythons, if they even can? What if they become the new problem? Scientists swear they studied everything thoroughly, but then again, that's what they said in Hawaii too. The Emperor had returned, the three-sided war. The Emperor was back, the one the swamp once revered and feared. The creature that, for many, existed only in stories told by old hunters whispering legends around crackling campfires. The stage was set for a battle of titans, an encounter so deep, so primal, and so symbolic that no documentary, no scientific paper, and no sensational news report could ever capture its full magnitude. But the real shock, the final blow to human pride, was not happening where people were looking. While researchers, environmentalists, and curious spectators laughed at the unlikely plans circulating in the media, the infamous snake versus snake strategy, something completely different was unfolding in nature's silence. While humans argued and mocked, the ecosystem worked quietly. A three-sided war had begun. What no one expected was this: nature was already fighting back, and it was doing so in a way nobody predicted, on its own. The other unexpected ending, deep in Big Cypress National Preserve, a place where the swamp breathes like a living organism, hot, humid, dangerous, and full of secrets. A research team was tracking a male Burmese python 13 feet long and 52 pounds that they had nicknamed Loki. Loki was part of a reproductive study equipped with a GPS that sent regular location updates. He was a monster, not record-breaking compared to the 18 or 20-foot giants, but a solid apex predator. Agile, silent, destructive. For the scientists, tracking Loki was routine until that day. It was a cold cold December morning by Florida standards, a thin fog rising from the wetlands like the breath of unseen creatures. Researchers checked the map. Loki's signal had been stationary for hours, resting, digesting, normal. They followed the signal calmly, expecting to find the python coiled under dry brush, maybe digesting another native victim, but what they found left them speechless. Loki's massive body lay stretched out on the ground, half on sandy soil, half on low vegetation. At first glance, he looked like he was just sleeping, but as the team approached, their stomachs tightened. Loki's head, the command center of a 24-kilogram apex hunter, had been completely chewed apart, not torn off, not ripped by large puncture wounds, chewed, so mangled that it had been pushed beneath a layer of pine needles, perhaps in a final reflexive movement, perhaps by the predator trying to hide scent, perhaps by accident. The sight was grotesque, but it was also fascinating. It didn't match the bite pattern of an alligator, who tears large chunks. It wasn't a panther, who kills cleanly and usually avoids scavenging. It wasn't feral hogs. Too chaotic, too destructive, and yet something had killed Loki. Something had attacked, overpowered, and eaten part of a predator that had reigned for 2 decades, untouchable and almost mythological in the Everglades. Then came the question that echoed for days. What in this devastated ecosystem could have done? This? Theories began immediately. Alligator? Maybe, but unlikely. Florida panther? Possible, but no evidence. Another python? No signs of that. Science needed answers. The truth revealed by a trail camera days later, a monitoring camera, placed in the same area to catch anything unusual, finally identified the culprit, and the culprit was unbelievable. A bobcat, an adult bobcat estimated at just over 11 kilograms, had killed and eaten the head of an adult Burmese python more than twice its length and nearly 3 times its weight. The discovery stunned the scientific community. Unprecedented, improbable, nearly biologically impossible. A historic turning point. For decades, Burmese pythons were the uncontested destructive force of the Everglades. Nothing hunted them, nothing challenged them, no native species knew how to deal with them. There were 0 confirmed cases of native predators effectively killing them, and suddenly, an 11-kilo bobcat shattered the myth. The game changer. The swamp responds. This discovery was so shocking that experts began rethinking everything they believed about Everglades ecology. A native predator had located the python, assessed an opportunity, decided to attack, killed it, consumed part of it, and likely would repeat the behavior. This raised bold hypotheses. What if it wasn't a fluke? What if native predators are learning? What if the swamp is adapting? Innovative behavior, especially when observed spreading, can indicate real-time behavioral evolution. But this wasn't the only story. The Everglades begin to strike back. At the same time, across Florida, new reports surfaced. Reports that once would have been dismissed as hunter exaggerations, but now carried credibility. Alligators ambushing pythons. The original swamp predators were increasingly caught on camera ambushing smaller pythons, and rarely even large ones. Before, the reverse was common. Pythons eating juvenile alligators. The balance was shifting. Florida panthers confronting adult pythons. One of the most endangered species in North America was being recorded in direct battles with pythons. Panthers are fast, calculated, and precise, able to avoid snake strikes with incredible reflexes. The hypothesis: they were observing and learning. Bobcats transmitting behavior. And then came a deeper theory. What if predators are passing the knowledge on, not like humans, with words, but through observation and experience? A bobcat watches another. Kittens watch adults. A successful attack becomes a pattern. A pattern spreads across territory. Biologists call this emergent animal culture, one of the fastest evolutionary forces known. One biologist summed it up: a point for the home team. Small, yes, but something. But adaptation is slow. Too slow. And here lies the problem. One bobcat kills one python. One alligator eats a few juveniles. One panther might confront a handful a year. Meanwhile, for every killed python, thousands hatch, hidden in deep roots, burrowed beneath logs, inside unreachable cavities. Long term, this does not reverse the damage. Native predators are learning, but at human speed, slow, generational. The pythons arrived like an explosion. The natives react like erosion, gradual. The swamp scored a point, but the scoreboard was still humiliating. The Everglades were losing. It had been completely wiped out of Alabama and North Florida. So here's the point, the ridiculed plan was never about adding a new snake. It was about restoring a native apex predator humans had already wiped out. For decades, a coalition of conservation groups and state agencies had been breeding eastern indigo snakes in captivity with extreme care. They restored patches of longleaf pine forest and protected gopher tortoise populations. What looked to the public like an impulsive, crazy idea was actually one of the most careful, slow, scientifically grounded restoration projects ever attempted. But that doesn't mean the wild theories are wrong. What if this becomes the mongoose scenario? What if we're releasing a new apex predator into a system that's already broken? What will indigos eat after they eat the pythons, if they even manage to? What if they become the new infestation? Scientists swear they did all the research, but then again, that's what they said in Hawaii too. The emperor had returned. The stage was set for a clash of titans, but the true shock, the real ending, was happening somewhere else. For years, conservation teams had been releasing captive bred eastern indigo snakes in a protected area of North Florida, the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve. It was hundreds of miles north of the main python invasion, but it was the indigo's ancestral home. They marked them, tracked them, and hoped. Then, in the fall of 2023, something extraordinary happened. Trail cameras recorded images that changed everything. They showed two wild, newborn eastern indigo hatchlings. They were descendants of adults previously released. For the first time in nearly half a century, the eastern indigo snake had successfully reproduced in the wild in North Florida. This was no longer survival, it was rebirth. And when biologists confirmed that one hatchling had no markings, it became undeniable. It had been born entirely without human intervention. The indigos were not merely hanging on, they were living, hunting, and raising the next generation in their ancient homeland. As 2024 and 2025 unfolded, the story grew brighter. More snakes were spotted. A robust male nearly 2 meters long was recorded moving with confidence through vegetation. 19 other individuals from previous release years were identified, still thriving. The heart of this recovery was the land itself. The slow, back-breaking work of restoring longleaf pine ecosystems and protecting gopher tortoise burrows had finally paid off. The ecosystem was not just recovering, it was functioning again. So here's the straight truth, since you're probably wondering if this solves the python problem. Will indigos eat all the pythons? Does this fix everything? No, of course not. The indigos are being released in North Florida. The Python Fortress is in the far south, in the Everglades. They're not even in the same battleground yet. But that's not the point. The real unexpected outcome, the one no one saw coming, is twofold. First, nature itself is adapting. Bobcats and alligators are learning. Second, a conservation plan built on patience, science, and trust in the land actually worked. For decades, the story of the Everglades was one of human failure. We failed to stop the snakes, failed to remove them, tried a high-tech silver bullet, and it blew up in our faces. But the solution that finally brought hope wasn't a robot or a drone. It was a native snake. The slow, difficult restoration of land. The return of the king. Pythons are still a crisis. The lungworm is still a plague. But footage emerging from Florida's swamps has revealed an ending nobody expected. Resilience. Hope. And now comes the wildest theory of all. What happens next? What happens when the indigo's expanding territory pushes south and the python's expanding territory pushes north? And they finally meet. And more importantly, what happens when the lungworm meets the emperor? If the parasite reaches the newly restored indigo snakes, are we just restoring a species only to deliver it into the jaws of an invisible monster? The real ending is not an ending. It's the beginning of a new three-sided war. The python, the parasite, and the emperor. Are we witnessing a recovery or the next phase of the apocalypse? Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed our content, make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Also, check out the other interesting videos appearing on your screen right now. And I'll see you in the next one. See you next time.